Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be tested in the simplest act of kindness? Well, you're about to witness a story that will grip your heart and make you rethink everything about judgment and compassion. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Threads of Kindness, because stories like this remind us that the smallest gestures can change lives forever. In a small town, tucked away on a quiet street, there was a diner that had been serving the community for over 30 years. At the heart of it was Martha, a 60-year-old waitress with a warm smile that could light up the dreariest Monday morning. She wasn't rich, she wasn't flashy, but she carried herself with an unshakable dignity and a rare, genuine kindness that everyone in town noticed. Every day, she greeted customers with the same warmth, remembered their favorite orders, and lent a listening ear to anyone who needed it. But one crisp autumn morning, the diner's owner, Mr. Caldwell, returned from a business trip with a peculiar plan in mind. He wanted to test his staff, to see who truly cared about people beyond the money, beyond the tip jar, and beyond appearances. Little did Martha know that this day would be unlike any other. Mr. Caldwell disguised himself as a homeless man, tattered clothes, unkempt hair, and a stooped posture, blending into the shadows outside the diner. He shuffled in just as the morning rush began, and Martha's sharp eyes noticed him immediately. Where most would avert their gaze or pretend not to see, Martha approached him with gentle curiosity. She asked if he wanted coffee, handed him a warm muffin, and even offered a blanket from the coat rack, insisting he sit near the heater. The other staff members whispered, some rolling their eyes at what they considered unnecessary fuss, but Martha ignored them. She had always believed that kindness mattered more than protocol, more than rules, more than judgment. Mr. Caldwell watched from a corner, silently evaluating, but with a growing sense of admiration and, unexpectedly, a twinge of guilt. Yet, the situation took a sharp turn when the diner's assistant manager, a woman eager to climb the ladder and often jealous of Martha's natural rapport with customers, noticed the interaction. She stormed over, whispering harshly, "You can't waste time on loiterers. The owner would never approve of this. You're supposed to be working." Martha looked her straight in the eye and said softly, "No one should be invisible. Everyone deserves a little warmth." That simple sentence carried the weight of decades of experience, compassion, and integrity, but it didn't save her from the consequences. By the end of the morning, a formal note awaited Martha on the counter: she was fired. The news spread quickly. Some customers were shocked, others disappointed, and a few simply shrugged, blinded by the routine of their own lives. But for Martha, this wasn't just about losing a job. It felt like a personal betrayal by a place she had nurtured with loyalty and love for years. That evening, she packed up her apron, leaving the diner with a heavy heart and memories of decades filled with laughter, conversations, and genuine connections. She walked home through the quiet streets, thinking of the many people she had helped without expecting anything in return. Among the sorrow, there was a strange sense of peace. She knew she had done the right thing. But little did she know, the story was far from over. Because sometimes, life has a way of rewarding the brave and compassionate in ways we could never anticipate. And what happened next was something that not only changed Martha's life forever but would shock the entire town. Stay tuned, because by the end of this story, you'll witness an unbelievable twist of fate that proves kindness is never wasted. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness so you never miss a story that touches your soul and restores your faith in humanity. The morning after Martha was fired, the sun rose like any other, but for her, the world felt heavier. She walked slowly through the familiar streets of her town, the crisp autumn air carrying a bittersweet chill that mirrored her mood. Her thoughts wandered to the diner, to the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, and the smell of coffee that had been part of her life for decades. She felt a deep ache in her chest, not for the lost paycheck, but for the sense of belonging she had nurtured there, a place where she had poured love into every interaction. Yet, even in sorrow, Martha's heart remained unshaken. She believed that every act of kindness, no matter how small, had its place in the universe and would eventually return in ways one could not predict. That day, as she wandered past the town square, she noticed a small crowd gathered near the fountain. Curious, she edged closer, her worn shoes crunching against the fallen leaves. At first, it seemed like an ordinary gathering, neighbors chatting, children playing, but then she saw a figure she recognized immediately, the man from the diner. But it wasn't the same man. His disguise was gone. His eyes were no longer hidden under a hood. He looked dignified, commanding, and somehow familiar in a way that made Martha pause. It was Mr. Caldwell, the owner of the diner. She froze, heart pounding. Why was he here, in plain sight, looking so different? Before she could ask, he spoke, his voice carrying across the fountain, clear and firm. Martha. Her name on his lips made her feel an unexpected warmth, and she stepped closer, hesitant yet compelled. Yes, that's me, she replied softly, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Caldwell approached, and with each step, Martha's confusion grew. The whispers in the crowd began to spread, people recognized him, some murmured about his wealth and influence, and the townsfolk's curiosity turned to awe. I need to apologize, he said, stopping just a few feet away. Martha raised an eyebrow, uncertain whether this was a test, a joke, or something entirely different. For what? She asked cautiously. For not trusting your heart sooner, he admitted. Then, he gestured around him, indicating the gathered crowd, the small cameras he'd discreetly set up capturing the scene. I disguised myself as a homeless man yesterday to see who would show true compassion. I was testing everyone in the diner, and I must say, your kindness was extraordinary. Martha's eyes widened, shock and disbelief battling for dominance. You mean, she stammered. The realization hit her slowly, she had been judged not for incompetence, laziness, or negligence, but for caring too much. The crowd leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. Mr. Caldwell continued, many turned away. Some whispered, some scolded, but you, Martha, you treated me with respect, with warmth, without judgment. And for that, I am forever grateful. The words, unexpected and profound, stirred something deep within her. The humiliation, the fear, the sorrow of yesterday, it all began to dissolve in the light of his acknowledgement. But the surprise was far from over. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to her with a solemn expression. This is more than a letter of apology, he said, his eyes locking with hers. It is an offer. I want you to know that kindness like yours should never go unnoticed. Tomorrow, you will see how much your actions have mattered, not just to me, but to everyone around you. The crowd began to murmur, sensing a turning point, an unveiling of a story that would be remembered for years. Martha held the envelope tightly, feeling its weight, not just in her hands, but in her heart. She had given without expecting anything in return, yet here it was, life returning her courage, her integrity, her humanity, in a form she could never have imagined. That day, she walked home with a renewed spirit. The autumn leaves no longer felt cold, the air seemed lighter, and her steps were surer. Deep down, she sensed that the world had conspired to show her that genuine kindness, even in the face of adversity, always finds a way to shine. And tomorrow, the true miracle would unfold. Before we continue to see how Martha's life changes forever, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness, because this story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss the moment when compassion truly triumphs over cruelty. The next morning, Martha woke with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. The envelope from Mr. Caldwell still rested on her kitchen table, unopened, its presence both mysterious and promising. She had spent the night pondering what it could contain, an apology, a financial settlement, or something even more extraordinary. She hesitated briefly before lifting the flap, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a handwritten note and a small key. The note read, "Meet me at the diner at noon. You've earned more than I can ever explain. Trust in your heart, as you always have." Martha's heart raced. She had walked away from the diner only a day ago, carrying humiliation and sadness, yet here she was, holding an invitation that promised redemption. The key, she realized, must symbolize something far greater than a physical door. It was a gateway to recognition, to justice, to the affirmation of everything she had stood for. By noon, Martha found herself standing in front of the diner once again. The familiar neon sign flickered gently above her, and she could see the staff inside going about their routines, unaware of the unfolding drama. As she stepped through the door, the chatter of morning orders and the hiss of coffee machines felt surreal, like she had stepped into a memory. Mr. Caldwell stood near the counter, no trace of his previous disguise, his eyes gleaming with sincerity. "Martha," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. Today, you're going to see how your simple act of kindness has impacted more lives than you could imagine." He gestured to the small stage area he had set up near the window. Curious, Martha approached, and the crowd in the diner, staff, loyal customers, and a few curious townsfolk, watched silently as he continued. "Yesterday, I wanted to see who would act with genuine compassion. Martha did. She showed me that kindness is not just an action, but a reflection of character. Because of her, many lives will be touched today. Martha felt a knot in her throat. Before she could respond, Mr. Caldwell raised his hand, and a young woman entered carrying a large check, the amount written boldly in numbers that made Martha's eyes widen. It was substantial, enough to provide security for her remaining years, to repay decades of loyalty, and to offer her the freedom to pursue the passions she had long postponed. The diner erupted in whispers and gasps, and Martha's cheeks flushed with disbelief and gratitude. But the surprises weren't over. Mr. Caldwell signaled toward the doorway, and more people began to arrive, customers who had witnessed her generosity, neighbors who had heard of her actions, even former colleagues who had doubted her. They were here not just to witness, but to celebrate, to acknowledge that her courage and kindness had not gone unnoticed. Some brought flowers, others wrote heartfelt notes, and a few even offered words of employment opportunities, charity work, or collaborations that would honor her spirit. Martha stood, rooted in place, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the moment. Tears streamed down her face as she realized something profound. The act of helping a stranger, of treating someone with dignity regardless of appearances, had sparked a chain of events far beyond her imagination. Mr. Caldwell stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've reminded us all," he said softly, "that the world can be harsh, but it doesn't have to be. There's immense power in kindness, and it can create ripples we never see coming." At that moment, Martha understood the truth she had always lived by. Compassion is never wasted, and integrity always finds its reward, even if it takes time and trials to manifest. She looked around at the smiling faces, the nods of respect, and the genuine gratitude, and a warmth spread through her that no hardship could ever extinguish. That day, Martha didn't just reclaim her dignity, she inspired an entire community to value empathy, to see beyond appearances, and to act with courage in the small but meaningful ways that truly matter. And as the crowd cheered, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had been exactly where she was meant to be. Before we move on to the next chapter, where Martha's life takes an even more unexpected and heartwarming turn, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness. Stories like hers remind us that every act of goodness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world in ways we could never anticipate.
The applause thundered through the grand hall, echoing in Amara's chest like the heartbeat of a new beginning. She stood on stage, clutching the sides of the podium, her breaths uneven but her spirit soaring. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not as someone to be doubted, not as someone questioned at a boarding gate, but as a woman whose voice carried weight and purpose. As the crowd slowly settled, she caught sight of James Carter once more, rising from his front row seat and moving toward the stage with deliberate steps. Her pulse quickened. What was he doing? The event host whispered something into the microphone, then gestured toward James. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. James Carter, our keynote sponsor and one of the leading philanthropists in the country." The room erupted in another wave of applause, but Amara froze, stunned. The man who had quietly sat beside her on the plane, who had witnessed her humiliation and spoken to her with simple kindness, was not just another businessman, he was James Carter, a name she had heard whispered in nonprofit circles, known for funding initiatives that empowered underrepresented voices across the globe. James reached the podium, shaking Amara's hand with a firmness that radiated respect, not just courtesy. "Miss Amara," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "your words today moved not only this audience but me personally. You reminded us all that resilience is not just a concept, it's a lived reality, one too often dismissed or overlooked because of prejudices we refuse to confront. What you experienced today, from the moment you stepped into that airport, is the very reason we need leaders like you in the spotlight." The audience leaned in, captivated, murmurs of agreement rippling through the hall. Amara's cheeks burned, her eyes glistening, unsure how to react. James turned to the crowd. "It is easy to judge someone by their appearance, their clothing, their background. But what we forget is that brilliance, strength, and vision rarely wear labels we can recognize at first glance. Today, Amara reminded us, never judge a book by its cover." A roar of applause shook the hall again, and Amara stood there, her heart racing. She felt as though the humiliation at the boarding gate had been rewritten in this moment, her pain transformed into purpose. James placed a hand on her shoulder, his tone softening as he addressed her directly. "You deserve more than just applause, Amara. You deserve a platform." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I would like to personally offer you a mentorship through my foundation, as well as the resources to expand your reach. Your story deserves to be heard by the world, and I intend to help make that happen." Amara's breath caught in her throat. For years she had fought silently, carrying the weight of doubt, enduring prejudice, questioning her worth. And here was a man whose influence stretched across continents, standing beside her, offering not charity but partnership, recognition, and opportunity. Tears welled in her eyes, and though she tried to blink them away, one slipped down her cheek, betraying the storm of gratitude and disbelief within her. The audience rose to its feet, delivering a standing ovation that lasted longer than any applause she had ever heard. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and in that instant, Amara's story leapt beyond the walls of the summit. She wasn't just the girl who had been denied dignity at a boarding gate, she was the voice of resilience, the living proof of why kindness and recognition mattered. Later, as the summit concluded and the crowd dispersed, James and Amara found themselves seated in a quiet lounge. He leaned forward, his eyes sincere. "You may not realize it now, Amara, but today wasn't just a speech, it was a turning point. People will remember what you said, but more importantly, they will remember who you are." Amara smiled softly, her voice trembling with both humility and determination. "All I ever wanted was to show that we belong, no matter where we come from. If my story can open doors for even one other person, then all the struggles were worth it." James nodded, raising his glass of water in a toast. "Then let's make sure your story opens doors for thousands." The night sky stretched wide over New York City, its skyscrapers shimmering like beacons of ambition, but Amara's heart glowed brighter than any tower piercing the heavens. She walked slowly out of the summit venue, her backpack resting lightly on her shoulders, yet it no longer felt like a burden, it felt like a crown she carried proudly. The city buzzed around her with honking taxis, flashing billboards, and hurried footsteps, but in her chest was only a steady, calming rhythm: "You belong, you belong, you belong." The humiliation she had endured at the airport earlier now seemed distant, like a storm cloud dissipated by sunlight. She replayed James Carter's words in her mind, the way he had turned her pain into a platform and her voice into a beacon for others. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike, that the very man who had silently witnessed her struggle was now the ally who amplified her strength. Yet deep down, she knew this was no accident. Life had a way of testing her spirit, then sending unexpected hands to lift her higher. As she reached the curb to hail a cab, a voice called her name, gentle yet firm. She turned to find James once more, walking toward her with an envelope in hand. "Amara," he said, extending it, "this is just the beginning. Inside are details for the fellowship program at my foundation. We'll fund your initiatives, connect you with global leaders, and give you the stage your story deserves. But more than that, we'll ensure the world sees you for who you are, not who they assume you to be." Amara took the envelope with trembling fingers, overcome by a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. James smiled softly, his eyes kind. "Live your truth, Amara. That's thanks enough." For a moment, silence hung between them, not heavy but sacred, a promise forged in shared understanding. Then James stepped back, blending into the night with the ease of someone accustomed to moving in and out of the spotlight, leaving Amara standing beneath the glow of a streetlight, the envelope clutched to her chest like a key to a new future. In that quiet moment, she thought of the woman at the boarding gate, of the sideways glances in first class, of all the times people had whispered, "You don't belong." She thought of every door slammed in her face, every doubt cast upon her shoulders, every silent prayer whispered into the night. And she smiled, not out of bitterness, but out of triumph. They were wrong. She did belong. And now, she was going to make sure no one else would ever doubt it again. Days later, clips of her speech spread across social media, her words striking chords around the world. Headlines declared, "Young Black Woman Redefines Resilience at Global Summit." Comment sections flooded with praise, and stories poured in from others who had faced prejudice but found courage through her example. Amara became not just a speaker but a symbol, her story igniting conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and households alike. And somewhere, perhaps at another airport gate, another young girl of color would lift her chin a little higher, knowing someone had already carved a path before her. Amara's journey was far from over, it was only beginning. But as she looked out of her cab window at the glittering skyline of New York, she whispered a vow to herself: "Never again will I let anyone write my story for me. From now on, I hold the pen." And so, dear viewers, if this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness, resilience, and justice still matter in a world that too often forgets them, Then I invite you right now to like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness so you never miss another story that could change your perspective, and maybe even your life. Together, let's keep spreading voices like Amara's and prove that love and courage will always rise above prejudice. The morning of the verdict arrived with gray skies that seemed to mirror the weight on everyone's hearts. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters, flashing cameras, and protesters holding signs demanding justice for Ethan. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Maria sat beside her son, holding his small hand so tightly it trembled. Ethan, dressed in a clean white shirt that made his bruises stand out even more, kept staring at the door, as though waiting for someone who might never come. Detective Hale stood by the prosecution table, papers in hand, expression carved in stone. The officers sat pale and quiet beside their lawyers, their arrogance from days before now replaced by visible dread. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose to its feet. "Please be seated," she said, her voice heavy but steady. As she looked down at the files before her, the silence stretched on endlessly, until she finally spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. "This court has reviewed all evidence presented, the testimonies, the video footage, and the internal communications. The actions of Sergeant Blake and Officer Daniels on the night of March 12 were unjustifiable, inhumane, and a violation of every oath they swore to uphold." Her gavel came down hard once. "They are hereby found guilty on all charges: assault, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice." The courtroom erupted. Cheers and sobs filled the air. Maria gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. Ethan's eyes widened, not with joy at first, but confusion, as if he couldn't quite believe that justice had finally spoken for him. Hale exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing for the first time. But before the noise could settle, the judge raised her hand again. "However," she said, her tone changing, "there is one final matter that has come to this court's attention, a matter that was delivered anonymously this morning." The room quieted instantly. The judge held up a sealed envelope, her expression unreadable. "This letter," she continued, "was sent from an undisclosed location. It was signed by former Captain Raymond Carter." The air froze. Ethan's grip on his mother's hand tightened. The judge unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "Your Honor, I can no longer run from what I've done. I destroyed evidence to protect men who didn't deserve protection. I turned my back on my own blood. I will surrender myself to authorities today. But before I do, I've attached one more file, proof of a much larger cover-up involving higher-ranking officials." Ethan's case was just the beginning. There are others: children, families, silenced because they thought no one would believe them. "I can't undo my sins, but I can expose the truth. I only pray my nephew will forgive me someday." The courtroom gasped as the clerk brought forward a small flash drive attached to the letter. The judge's eyes darkened as she looked down at it. "This file," she said quietly, "will be turned over to federal authorities immediately. This case is far from over." Maria buried her face in her hands, crying softly, tears of both sorrow and relief. Hale closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if whispering a silent thank you to the man who had finally done the right thing. Ethan sat still, staring at the letter. His voice, when it came, was soft and trembling. "He did the right thing, didn't he?" Hale knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, son, he finally did." When the judge dismissed the court, people rose and clapped, not just for the verdict, but for the bravery of a child who had forced the system to listen. Reporters surrounded Maria, shouting questions, but she ignored them all. She knelt beside her son, cupping his face. "You did it, baby," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "You made them see." Ethan shook his head slightly. "We did it, Mom." The two embraced tightly as cameras flashed around them, capturing an image that would make headlines for days: a mother and son, standing tall against injustice. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall again, gentle this time, not like the storm that had once brought pain, but like a cleansing, a renewal. Detective Hale walked them to their car, his coat already damp. "They'll want to talk to you both for follow-up interviews," he said, "but you can take a few days to rest. You've earned it." Maria smiled faintly. "Thank you, Detective, for believing him when no one else did." Hale nodded, eyes kind. "It wasn't belief, ma'am. It was the truth. And your son had the courage to speak it." Ethan looked up at him. "Will Uncle Raymond go to jail?" Hale hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Yes, he will, but maybe now, he'll find peace too." As they drove away, Ethan gazed out the window, watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass. Mom, he said softly, maybe now people will listen when kids say they're hurt. Maria smiled through her tears. They will, sweetheart, because of you. The car disappeared down the wet road as the courthouse loomed behind them, a symbol of pain, truth, and the small voice that made the world stop and listen. And for everyone watching right now, if this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Kindness Tales Live. Because stories like Ethan's remind us that even the smallest voices can shake the walls of power, and that courage, no matter how young, can change the world.